All right. Good morning, everyone. I have the fun of making sure everyone is awake in the movie theater. So a couple of, contrarian rules apply to this movie theater. You are allowed to talk. You are allowed to clap. You are allowed to laugh at my many jokes in this presentation. I'll point to you to help you out of when it's time to laugh. Let's practice. Oh, what a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. All right. And we have a fairly intimate group here, which is going to be a lot of fun. I'd love to just get to know the crowd a little bit. We're going to talk about enablement today, specifically with developers. How many people in your current organization today are responsible for enablement? A couple. How many are some contributing factors? Someone asks you to do something. Okay, awesome. How many of your audience includes technical counterparts? So solutions engineers, solution architects, implementation teams. Okay, awesome. And then last question, how many people have a sales team less than 50 people? How many, like 50 to 100? Anyone, like 250, 300 plus? Cool, awesome. So we have a nice variety all around. So this will be fun. So a little bit more about me. Farhan, flying in from Austin today. I, maybe like many of you, fell into product marketing. More specifically, I ran into product marketing. So I started my career in sales. This is BC, right before Corona. We were in the office, and I was in the kitchen, and I got an email from a CMO that I was chasing for a while, trying to get a meeting. And I immediately, looking at my phone, turned and ran to my desk because they just responded, and I ran straight into one of the VPs at the company. And I profusely apologized, took him out to coffee later. It turns out he was a VP of product marketing. And from that conversation, really got to understand that a lot of what I defined and originally thought as just kind of the future of sales was actually a totally separate function called product marketing, right? How do we effectively take the guesswork out? And from there, that's where I got super excited, started to learn more, started to actually take on projects, and inevitably transitioned into product marketing from there. So since then, I've been mainly focused on a technical buyer. This is all the way from the IT buyer to product leaders, and now within Grafana Labs, focusing on building a bunch of tools for developers to help find issues proactively before their customers tell them there's a problem with their app. So think a lot of uptime, incident response, incident management, things like that. All right, so let's set the scene here. You're currently working and you get a Slack. It's from one of your reps. They have a huge opportunity, right? Nice enterprise deal. It's a competitive takeout with one of your main competitors. And of course, nothing you have built already will make sense for this deal. They're trying to drive some urgency, answer the question of why now, and more specifically, why us? And they need you to do some custom work, right? Build out this deck, totally custom for them, for their buyer, for the use case, all that good stuff. And you are right in the middle of a product launch. You got a tier 1 launch coming up, you're prepping, you're building that timeline that you've already edited 7 times, but it's not perfect yet, so you got to keep going. And you reach the existential question of, what do I do? Do I stop what I'm doing and help this person? The answer is always yes, but. And the but is critical. A couple of things you should always do before saying yes is pressure test a little bit. First off, what's the urgency here? Do we already have a meeting with this buyer that we're going to present all this great material, or is that still in flux TBD? The second is there an awareness problem? Is there something that you or one of your counterparts has already done that they just don't know about that can be repurposed here? Or instead has another rep done something very similar that you can instead just crowdsource that information instead of starting from scratch? But again, even if all of those things are not true or don't apply, you should still do the custom work. But before you even start, you should sit down with that rep and agree on the forum and timeline to present this information out to the rest of the team so this knowledge is shared, and this is never a one-off request again. Always have to think about how to do this in the future. And the why behind this is the best reps out there are always taking calculated risks to sell outside the ICP. right? They're going and trying to find that next buyer, that next industry, that next use case where your product doesn't quite fit, and they know that, but they know that one day they're going to strike gold and they're going to blow their quota out of the water. These are the reps that as a marketer, especially as product marketers, we really do have to stay close with, and doing custom work is exactly how you can make sure you're in the room getting the information in real time. Sounds great, right? But I get it. This is really hard work. If you're just getting started, you're trying to figure out, well, what types of collateral are even out there, right? What should I prioritize? Battle cards, one-pagers, what should I be doing? Or you might be asking, what's the best for our motion? Whether we're sales-led, product-led, etc. How should we, how does that influence the type of collateral that we make? Or you're thinking about organizationally. Does it even make sense for you to own all of this? Should you be relying on some cross-functional partners? Maybe product should take a role. Who else should really be thinking about this? How do I balance net new creation versus refining what we already have in the field, in market today? Or the ever-elusive question of adoption. How do I know this is even worth all this time, all this effort? How do I know that this is actually driving revenue for the business? How do I know that it's actually getting used? I keep putting things out there, but I'm not quite sure what happens after. Anyone ask themselves any of these questions recently? A couple folks? Okay, awesome. Fundamentally comes down to incentives. Your incentives as a marketer, as a product marketer, should be directly in line or aligned with your sellers. Because at the end of the day, again, speaking from former sales perspective, a salesperson will never do what you expect. They will always do what you inspect. And this is where your relationship with frontline managers becomes critical, because frontline managers are consistently inspecting deals, and if your incentives are aligned, the adoption of all of your work doesn't just become a product marketing goal and product marketing OKR, it becomes the entire sales leadership asking questions, making sure that feedback loop is tight, so you always know you're working on the right thing at the right time. Let's talk about some of the common mistakes. Number one, as marketers, we know this to be true, right? If you are not targeting a specific message, a specific buyer, a specific pain, your message is not landing at all. Why should your enablement be any different? So often we just schedule one big meeting with all the SDRs and AEs and SEs and everybody in one room, and you're like, yeah, it's way easier for me that way, and then we do a training. Or we focus too much on the enablement and not think about the execution aspect of this. Just like as product marketers, we rely on maybe our DevRel or Dev Advocates or our demand gen counterparts to really hone in on the tactics and channels to get our message to the buyer. From a sales perspective, they also need this exact same type of tactical advice. And then lastly, if you've ever been listening to a conversation in Gong and you hear those cringe moments where one of your salespeople absolutely butchered the new pitch you just rolled out 3 weeks ago, you may immediately just chalk this up to, wow, that salesperson sucks. Or I challenge you to think about this differently, which is, what's the alternative? Where have you created a forum for this rep with this new messaging that you just rolled out to practice? Because they're not going to get it right the first time. And if they don't have an opportunity to practice outside of live conversations, guess what? That cringe moment you just heard on Gong, that's them trying out your pitch, maybe for the very first time. So think about including practice moments. Let's go deeper into each of these. And this slide, has some fun in it, but this is not, we're not here to name names. I'm sure you're thinking of some names of some people you've come across in your career. We don't have to name them, but we can think about them. Generally, you're going to meet 3 types of sellers in your career. Number 1 is going to be the know-it-all. You know they're the know-it-all because they've either told you one of 2 things. 1, that no one can ever replicate what they're doing, so product marketing shouldn't even bother trying. Or number 2, product marketing should just focus on bringing everyone and then laying them at the feet of this salesperson because they'll just absorb what they're doing and they'll just naturally figure it out. Anyone know a know-it-all? We're starting to think of those people? Yeah, thought so. The best way to work with the know-it-all is go early and one-on-one. So when you're thinking about an enablement session, I'm talking rough outline, we're just talking basic outcomes, high-level vision, really nothing written down on paper. That's the best time to go to the know-it-all and get their kind of strategic guidance on, hey, what's your opinion on the best way to even approach this? Forget what does this slide look like and that. Don't focus on these details. Let's talk big picture. What's the best way to drive this outcome in your opinion? The next type of seller is the 21 questions. When you're leading a training, this is the person that asks a bunch of questions. Maybe half of them are relevant to the topic you're presenting it about. The other half are just questions that seem to be going on in their mind. The best way to work with this type of seller is partnering with your frontline managers. You go with your frontline managers and you preview the content with 21 questions. And then after that meeting, you go with your frontline managers and your sales managers and you better understand how many of the questions they were asking are representative of the broader team and should actually be, influence the direction of the enablement, and how many are just should be dismissed and just ignored. Really help your frontline managers can give you that perspective. And then lastly, you have the beginners. These are the folks who were recently promoted from the SDR world or came into the AE role not having any prior sales experience. These are the people who are going to need extra reps for it to really land. These are the people where that extra mile work makes the most impact. Sending the content beforehand so they can go through and read the material. Sending key takeaways and recaps and recordings afterward. Being able to, again, have that forum to practice. Your sales managers are really going to be the one doing a lot of the heavy lifting, and so this is where that partnership with them is critical in identifying and early on, before your enablement even happens, documenting the plan in place to make sure they're getting those extra reps and they are not getting left behind. The next piece is enablement versus execution. Enablement is focused on the what. The piece that's often missing is the how. Let's be specific with, let's say, a one-pager, right? Probably the most common request for a product marketer is, hey, can you make a one-pager for this? If I'm describing you right now, which is you make this one-pager, you go through a couple of iterations, you probably talk to some customers first, hopefully. And then you go into Slack, you have 500 people in this channel, you put in @here, new one-pager, Slack absolutely notify everyone because everyone needs to know I made a new one-pager, and then you go on to your next project. Chances are no one is going to use it, and here's why. If I'm an SDR, I'm looking at that one-pager and I'm saying, this is awesome, but how do I use this? Should I be putting this in my first touch and that's going to help me increase my open rates? Is this something that I should be sending once I book a meeting and that's going to help me increase my hold rate or people actually showing up? As a sales rep, I'm thinking, is this something that I should be using instead of the slide deck? Which type of buyer is going to resonate most with this one-pager? Fundamentally, these are coin-operated individuals, right? And what that means is every change they deem as risk. And if you don't do the work of de-risking or understanding the how do I actually use this in my day-to-day workflows, that is where you see the lack of adoption. It's usually a salesperson defaulting to, I'm going to go back to what I know because it may not be the best thing in the world, but I know it works for me and I know I can hit quota with it. Again, incentives have to be aligned, and really you have to de-risk what the salesperson needs in order to drive that adoption. And the last piece here is the difference between okay and great enablement is not just focused on honing in your message, but really thinking about the mouthpiece. And we do this today so well with our product launches, right? We go and we have some kind of early adoption program and we find some customer, and when it comes launch time, we plaster their face and their quotes and their company logos everywhere, and we really lead through the front, through their voice, right? Speaking through them on our behalf, because we know it's way more impactful to hear from real life customers than this biased company who clearly just wants to make money. The same is true for your enablement. before you go into any team-wide presentation, you should be dog-fooding whatever, your new pitch, your new collateral. Have reps use it on live deals. Get reactions in real time. Get feedback early on. Make some small iterations. By the time you get to that team-wide presentation, you should actually be able to just have your sales reps present on your behalf. Hey, I've been using this and here are the outcomes. And then let the sales reps simply ask questions for some of the maybe more nuanced specifics for their own deals. But again, just like product launches, way more impactful to hear from one of their own than hearing from Mr. and Mrs. Marketer who has never sat in seat and never had the pressure of actually feeling the quota. So any good product marketer worth their salt, I believe, has a framework for success. This is the one I've been using to run enablement at organizations for 100 sellers, 300 sellers. It scales for all types of buyers. The first is going to be a retention. You might already be doing a check for understanding, or you finish an enablement session and you're saying, hey, did that make sense? Do you have any questions? That's a check for understanding. The retention is 1 to 2 weeks later. How much of that pitch certification you just rolled out is sticking today? How many people are actually adopting it? And what's the feedback? And that directly ties into repetition. Again, whenever deals finish or deals are in progress, your sales managers are already asking questions. They're inspecting the health of the deals. Do we have contact with the executive buyer? Have we met with this person or that person? Do we have a plan about pricing? Do they know how we're priced? They're already asking all these questions. If you're partnering with sales managers early on, they can include some questions specific to you. What types of content or collateral have we presented that product marketing has released recently? Great question. And if you can't, not retaining it and no one is able to repeat it, finally you have to be able to research it, but in context. And I think that's the piece that often gets lost. And I've been guilty of this too. You're going in and you're making a 3-page dossier on one of your competitors. It has their history, their founders, their revenue, all kinds of stuff that you put together, which is fantastic. But if I'm a salesperson, here's my use case. There's 2 minutes left in this meeting, and I'm meeting the decision maker for the first time, and they mention something about a competitor. My goal is not to be a fountain of knowledge about this competitor because I only have 2 minutes left in this meeting. My goal is, how can I say 1 or 2 things that make me sound really smart and educated such that I get 30 more minutes on this person's calendar, and so that way I can prep more intensely for this conversation, or I can maybe bring in some other expertise to make sure I blow this out of the water. And if I'm looking through and I see a 3-page dossier, right, that doesn't help me. I'm just looking for those 1 to 2 bullets, again, to get to the next meeting, not necessarily show everything about a competitor. And you have to account for both of those use cases, right? Live in call versus prep beforehand. This is a framework that, in my opinion, when we talk about product marketing, we're thinking about how do I stop being, I see a lot of questions in the PMA Slack especially, how does product marketing stop being this kind of content generation machine? Should we just be hiring content marketers? What the hell does product marketing do all day anyway? We're just collateral, collateral, collateral. The way to stop being content generating machine and start being a trusted strategic partner to sales is by using a framework like this. This is how you'll never have to wonder kind of what is the adoption in ROI, because you'll consistently see a direct line between your work and revenue numbers that the business really cares about, like your pipeline goals, your ACV, and your win rate. Thank you so much to Dev Marketing Alliance for bringing me out here. My email is here. I'm here all day if anyone has any other questions. And there's a link to the slides if you want any of these. But thank you so much, and let's jump into questions.
Awesome. And I'm going to start this, and if I can't hear y'all, I will start running around with a mic. So first of all, thank you. Second of all, I heard Slack mentioned a lot. I may or may not be a fan. If anyone wants tips on how to Slack, happy to talk to you about that. But let's get started with questions. I have a couple lined up, but anyone else have something that they want to ask? parody. I'll be the Hermione in the room. One of the things that I was really struck by is this identification of the different personas, internal personas. And I was wondering if you'd be open to sharing an example or a use case that you're able to for some of these, how you actually were able to take the notion of know-it-all and bring it forward. How were you able to work with those beginners? So just one or two example use cases to take it from that abstract to the reality.
Yeah, great question. A very specific example is we were doing a pricing update, quarterly pricing update, specifically in line with competitors. From our win-loss research, there were 2 competitors that had recently had a spike, and so we wanted to focus a little bit more specifically on them. And a big frustration from the sales team, more specifically, especially the know-it-alls who noticed this a while ago, more than everyone else, is their pricing structure was changing. And we were actually significantly less competitive, which is why they were asking for so much more in discounting. And so in preparation for this meeting, we as product marketing, one, we got to sit down with the know-it-alls and have specifics. We realized that they actually had contracts from some of the competitors that are showing a discounting structure that was very new, something we had not seen before. We had gong snippets from their champions who were sharing information about pricing that they've seen in competitive deals that, again, were very different from the research that we currently had. And ultimately, at the end of the day, there were maybe 3 to 4 data points that were really helpful for us in kind of helping us understand where to start, that we were then able to package into a trend and then really drill it down into information that everyone could be using going forward. So what we actually did was make basically a calculator, a pricing calculator that had a drop down for various competitors with updated numbers. So as a beginner sales rep, super simple. I come in, I drop down competitor, and I choose my product, and now I have a very easy price of understanding to go in and say, are we going to be more expensive, just as expensive, or less than? And that changes the rest of my positioning.
Wonderful. Opening it up. Anyone have any questions? Oh, we got one back there.
Yeah, you were talking earlier about you created like things like one-pagers and stuff for sales teams, and sometimes you found that it wasn't the most helpful for them, like depending upon what they needed. I guess I was curious on like, what was the best medium that you found to help enable sales to do sales calls? Was it like creating videos for them? Was it doing one-pagers? Like, what were like the assets that you created that you found were like really helpful?
Yeah, great question. So I can just repeat the question, if I heard correctly, was what are the assets types that were most helpful for enablement? Is that correct? Good summary? Yes, okay. So in my experience, when you focus on enablement and the execution part that's part of your enablement, it really becomes agnostic. A slide deck is just as useful as a one-pager, just as useful as a testimonial, because fundamentally it takes the guesswork out the most. And as a sales rep, when I'm balancing multiple different deals, I'm trying to think about how do I make sure this one and this one and this one lands within this quarter so I can hit my quota. I'm really not thinking about anything else. So the less I have to think in order to use it, the more likelihood you have to actually get it adopted. So in my experience, it's really totally agnostic as long as you're kind of de-risking it for the reps appropriately. And again, that's really being prescriptive. Hey, for SDRs, this is how you would use this very specifically. And ideally, here's how we've already done this in the past. We've run a pilot, and this is the outcome that your peers have already driven. Same with AEs, same for your technical counterparts. Each of them is going to care about something a little bit different.
So I'd love your advice on how you manage the expectations of a larger sales team as a product marketing manager, where each salesperson perhaps has different needs and wants, and there may be that know-it-all type. How do you, I guess, prioritize what assets are important for you to build out and develop, but also influence the sales force to say, these are the assets that will enable you to sell. How do you balance that, being told these are what I need, versus as an expert, as a product marketing expert, being able to say, actually, we've created these for you.
Yeah.
I'd love your advice on that.
Oh, this is a fun question. One of my favorite questions. So the question is for larger sales forces, when you have lots of competing priorities, right? Oftentimes, paraphrasing a little bit, the requests you're getting of what to create don't match with what you've already created, right? It always feels like net new work. There's no, nobody's using what we currently have. They just want something totally different. So is that it? So what do? I love this question. In my experience, partnership with frontline managers here is critical. And what do I actually mean by that? Just as often as I meet with my product manager counterpart, I meet with sales managers for our various segments. And so for context, Grafana Labs, we have maybe 200, 250 sellers, and then we segment those by our commercial, mid-market, and then strategic reps, right? And so and then those are also regionally based, and we're a global team. So within each of those, there is a VP that all this rolls up to. Just as often as I'm meeting with my product managers and making sure I have a good pulse on what we're building, what's the progress of all of those things, I'm also plugged in with my sales managers in the same way. I'm on every pipeline meeting, I'm on all the team stand-ups, and the whole purpose of that is having that tight feedback loop and pulse. And so what that allows me to do is really get ahead of, I now have a laundry list of requests and they're all due in a week, to I'm hearing the same pains at the same time as a sales manager. And so that creates the space for us to have a conversation on, hey, well, we can only get 3. So are we going to repurpose what we have today, or are we going to create brand new, right? And then it's just a simple negotiation from there, but really getting ahead of it so you can say, yeah, I know he said he needed this, but in my experience, I think this would actually be much better. What do you think about that? From there, your sales manager will always have a golden child, right? It's usually the person who exceeds quota most often, makes them look the best. Usually you can get buy-in from that golden child to pilot this first. Everybody listens to the golden child, right? When the golden child comes out and says, yeah, screw one-pagers, these 3 slides are the best, everyone, I promise you, will start using those 3 slides, right? And there's lots of great ways to track this in Gong and otherwise, but generally partnership with sales managers, get ahead of the conversation, and then pilot it with someone influential.
I think we have time for one more question. Ready? I actually have one more question, and perhaps it's one that we can all discuss during networking time as well, is that you made that comment about just kind of blasting something out, and I really liked the bringing it to that yes and, which is it's here and this is how you use it, is how do you make sure that it's scalable, discoverable, resonant? I think it really builds off the question you asked, which is if you have different personas, ultimately there may be different materials and different delivery methods. So what's your experience been distributing and scaling that information within your organizations?
Yeah, that's a good question. I rely heavily on the beginner persona in this case, because if I'm a new sales rep to this company, right? Again, I'm a beginner, I may be new to sales, and I'm new to this company. There's a lot to learn. Their number one goal is to de-risk, right? How do I hit quota and make sure I don't get fired? I just got here. And so oftentimes what they'll do is they'll naturally seek out and find all the resources, all the best reps, all the private spreadsheets with a bunch of links and the repositories that aren't well organized, but actually have fantastic information in them, right? Private Gong folders that no one shared with you, even though you made the onboarding, but already exist, because at the end of the day, a salesperson will figure it out, even if there's nothing. They find and usually curate all of these resources for you. And so what I usually do is partner with that person to find the most used repository and then make it legit, right? Put it with everything else, combine, consolidate, just do some of the easy, work for them in terms of being able to research things. And then I just see adoption take off naturally, right? Because it's already happened. I'm more just not fighting inertia, trying to create new adoption and really just anchoring and moving my resources to where salespeople are already looking. And the beginner usually always knows.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.